creative journey. It's easy to get lost, but don't worry, you'll lift off. Sometimes you just need a creative pep talk.
I think there comes a point in everyone's creative journey where they realize that their success or their creative practice really is on them. It depends on them to figure it out, to find the creativity within themselves, as well as figure out how are they going to fund this creative outlet. And when this hits you for the first time, it can be incredibly intense and debilitating. It can really dampen your creativity when you feel that level of pressure on what you're making. However, it can also have an inverse effect. It can be the thing that causes you to rise to the occasion and show up fully and try with everything that you've got. Today, I talk with Yowei Shaw, who is the host and creator behind the podcast, the very popular podcast, Proxy. I will let her explain what that show is all about. But she was also a host on Invisibilia, NPR's Invisibilia, before she was laid off. And that is a big part of her journey that we're going to explore today, and how this weight of having to figure it out has impacted her creativity in a positive way, how it has become an opportunity. And I think there are so many interesting, powerful takeaways in this episode that I'm excited to get to. Stick around to the end, and I'm going to come back with a call to adventure. It's the creative campaign. Create a creative campaign. It's a prompt that I'm taking from Yowei that they did with their show that I think proves that you can do a creative project that is very purposeful and strategic in how it pushes your business or financial goals for your creative work, and do something incredibly artistic and creative at the same time. And so I'll be back to kind of summarize that at the end. But for now, enjoy this chat that I had with the wonderful Yowei Shaw. I thought we could start by you explaining your show Proxy. There's like a kind of an ongoing gag on your show where you can't explain it. So I thought that'd be fun, but also I think you do a great job of explaining it from an outside perspective. So could you tell people what the show's all about?
Sure. Yeah, no, thank you for noticing the gag and also acknowledging that we are trying to get better at it. So I think, I hope I'm doing a better job by now. So Proxy is an emotional investigative show. I coined this term myself.
I like it.
Emotional investigative journalism. Thank you. It gets people are like, what is that? And I'm like, I'm making it up. We're still figuring it out. So on the show, we take listener cases. People write in with niche emotional conundrums that make them feel alone, that they have trouble talking to people in their life about and getting good advice about. And then we scour the entire world for a stranger for our guests to talk to, who can hopefully help them get less stuck. And that could be someone who's been through the exact same situation and has wisdom to share, or it could be like an expert who studied their exact issue for decades and like has insight that can help reframe their relationship with the issue. We like to say, think of sitting at a bar next to a stranger who just happens to have the exact right experience for you to talk about an issue you're dealing with.
Yeah. And they end up being a proxy for you, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And my follow-up question to that is kind of related to this emotional investigative journalism thing, because did that term come to you before you started the show, or is it something that you developed over time?
So Proxy used to not be the name of the show. I went through like a whole pitching process where I was like coming up with a pitch deck, going out to like podcast execs and them like having question marks and feedback and then like going back to the table and trying to refine. So emotional investigative journalism was just something that I came up with. I think it was like when I was writing the trailer for the first layoff series that I did. And so it was just like me and my editor trying to come up with like some phrase to describe what we were doing on the show.
Yeah.
And so we were trying a bunch of different things out. And then we settled on that. It was like, oh, this sounds intriguing. Maybe this will work. And honestly, like in the beginning, I started saying the phrase as a bit because like I think there's just something inherently funny about juxtaposing something so serious as investigative journalism with like something as squishy as emotions. So, but then like people really responded to it. And now I'm like, it's a real thing.
And also, it hadn't occurred to me before just this moment that these two things, it feels a little bit like an oxymoron in a way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like I hadn't fully thought about that. I do think journalism is a weird thing in this day and age. And I want to get to a little bit of your personal story of getting laid off and how this is like an independent project and why that perhaps makes it different as a creative endeavor. I want to get to that in a bit, but I'd like to talk about what I think makes the show so juicy, because I've heard people talk about it. I've just recently got hooked on it. And I think it's just that there's something going on here that maybe feels like it goes past regular journalism. And I'm wondering if, and it's complicated. I want to kind of get into why that might be complicated, but I wondered if you could tell us about how your relationship to this show has changed from when you had the idea. Like maybe I'm assuming you started with like, this feels like a novel idea. This feels like something fun and cool. Whereas over time listening to you on the show, it sounds like it's become more than a novel idea. And your relationship maybe has changed to it. Am I reading that right?
I don't know. Can I just like, I want to pick your brain because this is very interesting to like see on the other end, like the listener, like what their take on the show is. That doesn't totally
map.
I mean, it is like I have a very complicated relationship with the show.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know if it has necessarily changed over time. Can you tell me like, what is your
I'm
sense?
talking about?
Yeah. What are you talking about? What are you,
well,
do I seem more and more unhinged?
No, but I think any person that has tried to go alone on the creative journey, not, in-house in some kind of fashion.
Yeah.
It gets really real. So there's that element. I think that is present in your show because you're doing this independently, whereas in the past you've done it under, bigger organizations. So I think that's palpable. That's a big part of the show. You make it a big part of the show, which is what I think makes it really interesting beyond the show. Your experience is really relevant to this, to the show I do. But the reason I wondered if your journey with the show had evolved is because on paper, it sounds like an idea that sounds fun. It sounds like it'd make a good podcast. It also sounds like, you'll get some really juicy stories and all that is true. But then as I'm like listening to you explore it with therapists and experts and then also having to champion it for listeners and funding and all that, I just started to wonder if it felt like more than entertainment. I guess I'm getting to, go ahead. What were you going to say?
That's really interesting. Well, it for sure is more than entertainment. Like to me, I know I said like, emotional investigative journalism, it's a bit, but like I'm also dead serious about it. Like I really think that we need to be taking emotions more seriously. I think there should be more emotional investigative journalists. Emotions drive so much. They're a part of everything, every news event, every relationship, everything. And I think it's weird, honestly, that it's just like, oh, emotions, that's just for therapists. You know what I mean? Oh, that's just for you individually, for you to introspect. It's like, well, why wouldn't we as journalists try to report on these things, as like a lens to analyze, current events, our relationships, looking at the sociology of emotions, the history of emotions, the science of emotions. So like there is this kind of like highfalutin, like I am dead ass serious as a journalist about the show. But then I'm also just like, as like a creator, like I've just always been more interested in emotions, not just as a storytelling device, but like as the plot, So like, I think like for me,
that's interesting. I like that.
So I guess like what you're maybe picking up on is my relationship is changing to the show. Actually, you're right, because I'm figuring this all out on the air. You know what I mean? Like, I think that that's really different from the way I used to do journalism. When I was at NPR with Invisibilia, we would make 7 stories a year and we would polish. It'd be like, it was like this like artisanal, like narrative documentary that we would, spend all year perfecting and then put it out and then do the whole process over again. We would figure everything out before we shared it with our listeners. And I think there's obviously like there's a lot of pros to that. It's messy what I'm doing. I'm contradicting myself at times, because I learn new things about what I'm doing. We might mess up. We have messed up. But I think like, for me, transparency is one of the only things I have going for me. Like, I don't have funding from a production company. You know what I mean? It's transparency is one of the things that we can do that like, I wasn't able to do when I was at NPR. Cause like, no, everything has to like go through like standards and practices and our lawyer. And it's like, I can just kind of let it fly on the show.
That's an interesting way. It's true. It's not just like a reframe, but it's an interesting perspective to think about as you're like, that's an advantage you have as an independent creator, and all independent creators have that. And especially, I think it's extra interesting for those people who haven't experienced the opposite, because they might miss that there is real value and you get to be calling the shots and taking the risks and being transparent. It's a bunch of the stuff you said touched on things that I want to get to in just a second, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into this. Part of the reason I asked if your relationship to the show had changed, I get the sense that when I listen to an NPR show like Invisibilia, it can be incredibly powerful, but it feels akin to like entertainment, TV, things of that nature. Whereas when you're going on this journey on your own, partially because it's so much feels like it's riding on this for you, but also because of the topic of the show, where you're there's no way to get around the fact that there's a helping component. Yeah. Right?
Yes.
Like,
yes.
To helping these people work through something. And I wanted to ask you about that, because that creates this like meaning to your work that may be different, but then also complicated. I'm asking partially selfishly, not just from someone who does a creative self-help podcast, but also someone who does art, because I think as an artist, there is this complicated space between how we have moved from sounds really I'm like making a huge deal out of it, but I think there's something here. A religious culture to a therapy centric culture. And there's this weird like, where does art fit into this? Because I do think art I do think it helps and it matters. But anytime I feel myself going to that space or other artists see other artists going to that space, there's just all of this complexity because like, we're not therapists. And I feel that, but can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, wow. I am loving all these questions. The like, we're not therapists. I feel like I have to do that all the time on the show. And I have experienced that myself and that reaction from other journalists who I really respect, who are like, I don't know about what you're doing over there. So I think I need to go back to my work at Invisibilia, which is like, that was where I was raised, was like in the kind of traditional, like documentary medium, which is like you go out and you find a compelling, important story that you think is worth telling for the public service. You talk to a source and you get hours and hours of tape from them. You follow them over time. And then, with Invisibilia, we would also talk to experts who've done like research that's relevant. And then then those experts would help make meaning of the narrative stories that we were, covering. And to me, I just always felt it was strange that like we would be talking to these social scientists or whoever, and they would have like work that would be helpful to the quote unquote main characters of our stories. And I was like, it's really strange that like, I'm going to make them wait an entire year to hear this episode for them to get this utility out of it. Like, why wouldn't we just like bring them into the same space? And then it also just like felt, especially for like the work that I did, which was like, we have to find the craziest, most surprising, stranger than fiction story to like meet the bar that, we had to meet to get a story greenlit on the show. And it's like, I feel like I'm not going to speak for anyone else. I'm just going to speak for myself. I feel like I would sometimes lose sight of like, what is the source getting out of this? And then I would find myself like, trying to like make my case to these sources of like, this is why it's important and da 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 da. But like, I would always feel a little uncomfortable trying to like convince someone to tell their story. Cause like, it's either like you want to tell it or you don't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, so all of these uncomfortable feelings kind of led me to Proxy and the format that we do, because I think at my core, I'm like a service journalist biche. Like I want to be useful. I want to be useful to everybody in the process. I want to be useful to myself. I want to be useful to the listener. I want to be useful to the expert. I want to be useful to the guest. I want to be useful to I want everyone to get concrete things out of this experience, because I just didn't like, it's selfish, like, because I just didn't like feeling bad. Just like I wanted to stop feeling uncomfortable feelings. And so this is sort of like, so this helps me ethically kind of make sense of what I do. And then once I get to the format, then I'm like, oh, so how do I do this ethically? Like, because I'm not a mental health professional.
Right.
I'm a journalist.
Yeah.
It is very illegal for me to do therapy on the show. We do not do therapy.
This isn't therapy.
This is not therapy. Yeah. And so what I did was like, what I always do is just like, I have a problem, question, I go report. So then I've talked to like a ton of therapists by now to try to like get their take on like, how is emotional investigative journalism, the stuff that we're doing on the show, how is that different from the work you do? How is it similar? How can I avoid, what are things that I need to avoid doing to like make it not therapy? And then what would you suggest I do to make it safe? And so we have this like beautiful rubric that Anna Karin on our team put together, where we have these like basically guidelines for like how we assess whether a story is worth doing, whether it's safe to do, and then like how we like set up the proxy conversation, the norms and expectations that we like let everyone know, like this is not therapy. Everyone's responsible for their own boundaries. You do not have to answer any questions, blah, 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 all these different things. And it's still very, like, we're still very much figuring it out.
Yeah.
And like, we haven't, crossing my fingers, haven't fucked up yet.
Yeah.
I'm sure we will.
Right.
Because everyone fucks up.
There's just no way around
There's
it,
no way that we
really.
won't fuck up.
That's just the way it goes. But yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm just like hoping that we can put in a process where we're going to try really hard to not fuck up. And if we do, like every proxy conversation is an experiment, and we always debrief and learn from it and add to the doc. Because we're always like, we're figuring this out, you know, in real time.
Yeah. Part of the reason I ask you this is because even if the listener isn't making a show that borders on some topics that are like therapy, lots of creative people I talk to, I'm often encouraging creative folks to do two things with their personal projects. One, explore things they're interested in, and two, really, without being too utilitarian about it, thinking about what is the feeling or value that someone on the other end gets from this thing that you're making. And I think both of those things, when they're presented, a lot of times the reaction is, I'm just not qualified for that. I can't speak to that, whether it's therapy or science or, you know, whatever. But the reason I bring this up is not because I don't believe that delicate issues need to be handled by professionals. I do think that. I'm very serious about that. I know all the chaos and terrible things that have happened throughout history and time with people that were not qualified, or before we knew really how to handle this stuff, being casual about dealing with trauma and all that kind of thing. I am so on board with that. At the same time, I feel like, I don't remember where this comes from, but it's like a classic idea that nobody knows how to make a pencil. Like no one person knows how to make a pencil. You know, one person knows how the eraser's made and all these little, really small elements. And I think that I'm trying to get to the bottom of how can artists find their place in culture, because they are able to do something that a lot of therapists aren't. And every therapist can't be trained in art and vice versa and develop the craft and all that. And there just seems to be something that artists can do that is unique and useful. Does that make sense? Yeah.
No, I love thinking about this. I don't know if I have, because I don't really, you know, it's interesting. I don't think of what I do as art. I think
really?
of, I have
Do you mean
had
like
a whole,
I've had a art?
Well, I've had a whole, like, I've struggled with this question.
Okay.
Like my entire career, because like in podcasting, like narrative podcasting, there's this whole like spectrum of like, I'm a buttoned up investigative reporter who like would never use like sound design because that's false, you know, all the way to like the artiest sound art you can think of. And there's no plot and it's all just vibes and blah, 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 blah. That doesn't think of itself as journalism at all. And I've always just been like, I feel like kind of comfortable all over the place. Like I feel like I like being on all parts of the spectrum. So what am I, you know? And so the way I've made sense of it is the journalism comes first for me.
Yeah.
And then I will use whatever creative tricks and art up my sleeve to get you to listen, because then the journalism will have more impact. So that's sort of like how I make sense. And so then for me, it's like at the end of the day, if it's journalism, there are these kind of like, there's a whole like set of guidelines and a professional, you know, practices that I can think about. I don't have to, you know, I'm creating my own kind of journalism now that I have to, you know, wrestle with, but it helps like me make sense of that puzzle. And also, so for me, it's really like journalism versus therapy versus, instead of like art and therapy, like that question.
Right.
But I do think, to like answer your question around this, like, I talked to this therapist on my quest to like figure out what the hell is going on with my show.
Yeah.
And he said this really interesting thing that like he feels like people get their hackles up too much these days about like, oh, well, if it's therapeutic, then you have to be a professional. If you're touching certain subjects, emotions, trauma, childhoods, like whatever, then it's like, oh no, that's really for therapists. That's for a professional.
Yeah.
And his whole thing was like, we cannot medicalize. We should not be medicalizing genuine human interaction.
Yeah.
Because genuine human interaction is healing.
Yeah.
It's healing.
Yeah.
And it's like weird to be like, no, that's just for therapists. It's like, no. There's so many different ways you can heal. Connection, art is connection too. Like, you know what I mean? So I just offer that. I don't have an answer for you, but that's something that feels relevant to what you're talking about.
Yes. And that's a big part of what I'm trying to get at too, is that even though I'm really grateful for these standards and the ways that we've evolved to think about what is helpful, what's not having people rampantly going rogue.
Yeah.
I like all of that, but not only do we fall into a trap, I think, when we overly medicalize things, it also is privatizing connection and help in a way that is scary to me, right?
Right. When it's accessible and available to everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
It should be.
Human connection, should be. Without, yes.
It sort of isolates it. Like if you're going to be like, oh, well, that's helpful and healing, and that's really the purview of therapists. Well, so then are we just going to like back away from anything that feels helpful and healing in other then it feels like we're limiting our opportunities for this beautiful thing.
And making it more transactional too.
That's true. Right. So, you have to pay someone to get the thing. Yeah.
So I feel like there's just things to like evolve there, just in case some people didn't follow it, because I'm really into narrative podcast and radio. It sounds like what you're saying is when you're working on something like Invisibilia, which is kind of the NPR, This American Life, these sorts of shows that are really narrative driven. You would do this interview with a subject and they would have a problem or a situation. And then sometime later you would talk to an expert in the field and you'd realize like that would really help that person if I could connect those two people, but they might not ever hear it. Or if they do, it's going to be a year later when the episode comes out. And that Proxy is designed to kind of, eliminate the middleman and the time and make that work. And as you were saying that, one thing that came to mind is that there are elements of journalism that must feel a bit like treating humans like an animal documentary.
Oh my God.
You're like,
yes.
You're not supposed to
I've never heard that.
yourself in,
I've never heard that frame. And that is so spot on.
It's
so
weird.
brutal and it's so true. Not always, of course, but like it can feel like that sometimes because you're not supposed to like intervene. That's like one of the, core rules of, journalism traditionally, like do not intervene.
Right.
And even if you could help, like it's strange.
So it's a weird experiment. I'd love to switch gears a little bit and talk about your creative career at this stage and how doing this independently, having to sell it yourself, and how that maybe has shifted how you feel about your work. To kick that off, could you just explain how you got into this scenario?
Yes.
And being laid off and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
If you could just paint that picture a little bit.
Yeah. So I used to have a good job with benefits in the media industry. I worked for NPR and this documentary podcast, Invisibilia for many years, 7 years.
Yeah.
And then, NPR fell on hard times, like all the other media companies, and Invisibilia got canceled, and I got laid off with a bunch of other colleagues.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I was like, this sucks. And also like, where should I go work? Where should I try to get another job? And then at that point, I looked around and I just didn't see another shop doing the kind of journalism that I wanted to do. And, I don't have kids. At the time I was 35, I'm married. I have a husband who's a music producer, which is not, like the most stable career ever. But we had some savings and we talked it out. And he was like, I think you're going to always regret not trying. Mm-hmm. Like, even if it doesn't work, why don't you try for a year to like do your own thing?
Yeah.
And so, so then I started making this show, Proxy. And at first I wasn't planning on going independent. I was planning on just like coming up with this concept and then pitching it to podcast companies, production companies, and then selling it. And then having some other company entity fund the entire operation. And I would have like, a job with benefits or, money coming in at a regular interval. And I did that for a summer and it just didn't work, like I did get some offers that were okay, but basically everyone, if they said they were interested, they wanted IP, they wanted intellectual property. And I was just like, I cannot let myself get into the same situation where like some company owns the feed, the podcast feed, owns the idea. And then like, for whatever reason, some exec is like, we're shifting strategies, even if the show is doing well. So I guess I'm just going to try to do this on my own.
Yeah.
And at that point, I knew nothing about how you make money in podcasts. Because like before at NPR, I was just like, I'm under a rock, just making this little show. And that's it. I don't, business and advertising, that was handled by like an entire department. And there was actually like a firewall where actually like journalists are not supposed to like talk about any of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And so, I basically was like, now I'm on the beat of, now I'm a reporter who has to figure out how do you make a sustainable podcast in 2025 in a shitty podcast landscape when narrative podcasting is collapsing. And so I just like I made so many calls. I had so many meetings. I like really, really tried to learn like what was up. And then I came to the conclusion like, okay, so it's like advertising and some kind of subscription revenue membership program. And like ads are really, you're not going to be able to like get to this scale. You basically have to get something like 300,000 downloads within the first month for every episode to make the kind of money to support like a narrative podcast team. Yeah. And I was like, well, that like, it just doesn't happen anymore because it's so crowded at this point. And also in podcasting, audio first podcasts, there is no good algorithm. Yeah. So like discovery and growth is really like you're just kind of like clawing your way up through word of mouth and like feed drops and cross promos. And there's no YouTube algorithm that's going to like make you viral, and help you find your audiences. And so it was like, okay, advertising. And then there's subscription revenue, like, what they do on Substack and Patreon. And there's a whole bunch of different services out there. And those numbers made so much more sense to me. Mm-hmm. I was like, okay, I need around 3,000 Patreon members paying $5 a month for me to be able to like pay myself, pay other people, make this show. Yeah. And like 3,000 versus 300,000. I was like, okay, I feel like I can maybe, this feels doable. And so, basically I have not really even paid attention to advertising, and I have not really I've only sold one ad. And it's really just my focus is really on Patreon. Yeah. Which is, I learned later, 3,000 is a lot of members to try to get to. Yeah. So it sounds like, oh, it's not that much, but no, it's actually really, really hard. So that's sort of where I am, which is like, I'm trying to grow the audience to the place where there will be enough, like basically it's all about audience growth and also like how I'm making my Patreon pitch. And so my husband is very helpful, and he like made some complicated Excel formula thing where that like calculates like how big of an audience I need to try to get to try to get like the number of Patreon members that I want to get to.
Yes.
So yeah.
That makes tons of sense. And obviously it's a percentage of the total listeners are usually the ones willing to support a show.
It's very, very small.
It's very small. It's like 1%. That's my guess.
Yes. It's like 1% to 3%.
Yeah. That's my guess. And so there's so much stuff that's really interesting here that I want to pick out. One is this shift from, we talk about this on the show from time to time, the classic 1,000 true fans idea, shifting away from thinking, oh, I need to make these huge deals to, I just need this core group of people. And then also coming to terms with the fact that 1,000 true fans means, I don't know, 100,000 passive fans or whatever. But all good evolutions to how you think about your practice. I think it helps you zone in on who it's for, go deep with people instead of trying to go wide and appeal to everybody. Yeah. So there's a lot of really, really relevant stuff to everybody listening to that. One piece that I want to zoom in on is, this is what I want to try to get at, what's good about being on your own. So there's a lot of talk and information, rightfully so, about how putting all the pressure on your creativity can get in the way of being creative. It can make it hard to access your creative self when everything feels do or die. I've experienced that. I know lots of people have experienced that. But what I don't think gets talked about very much is the positive side of this. Yeah. And so when you were talking about earlier how at NPR, you're as the journalist, you're not really connected to the marketing of the show and these paths shouldn't cross. But then I thought, I've heard Ira Glass talk about how he attributes part of his success in becoming a great storyteller to having to sell his show and develop the ads for This American Life for all the different NPR stations. Yeah. Because it's so, so I'm not going to say anymore. How does that sit with you in terms of now that you are deeply connected to the selling of the show? Do you think it's changed your storytelling? Has it impacted it? Has it changed the way that you do the show?
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of positive things to say. I think it's been huge for my creative development. Let me list the ways. Let me count the ways.
Let's do it.
So number one is at Invisibilia, I was only reporting 1 or 2 stories a year. And at that time I was like bored. I was like, I can do more. Like I got lots of questions. Like I'm fast. Let's go. And so having to make, this new show where, the more you make, the better it is, the more of a habit you can become. And, this is all the advice I got. The more ads you can sell. Yeah. Basically, there is this huge push for more and more content, which is, of course, there are problems with that. You can overwork. Yeah. But for me, it's been really liberating to be like, okay, not everything has to be perfect. Yeah. I think I had like a perfectionist, like a lot of people have this perfectionist issue, maybe more in the beginning of their careers. And for me, it was debilitating. And it I think because I was operating from a place of fear. Mm-hmm. And now I'm operating from a place of play and experimentation because there's always I got to make another episode. Yeah. So it just lowers the stakes for like, how good does this have to be? Which weirdly has, I think, made my work the strongest it's ever been. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean that in all kinds of creative choices, like my writing, how I track, like doing these like silly bit with my husband who like mixes the podcast for free. He's like the running gag is he's the bedraggled podcast spouse. I'm always making him work on the weekend. Just like all of this stuff would never, like, first of all, like I just needed something. And I was like, what's like the first idea that comes to me? Okay, let's try it. Okay. Oh, that didn't work. Let's move on to the next thing. So I think it helps with the experimentation piece. And then I also think that doing things on your own has allowed me to get away with stuff that I would not. There's no way. And like I'm making the decisions here. I have a great team. I have like an amazing editor, Tim Howard, who used to be the editor of Reply All, my favorite podcast.
Yeah.
And he's like, I trust his taste over he's the best editor.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's my decision. And also, it's just the two of us mostly, just like making these calls. And so things just happen so much faster. There's not a lot of no. I would get a lot of no when I was at NPR, and that really stifled creativity and experimentation. In terms of like the selling of the show, and like, I think that, frankly, it just has pushed me to try to solve new creative challenges. I find that it's like most helpful for me personally whenever there's an issue I have. Like, it's like, can I report my way out of this? And or can this be like a creative challenge?
Yeah.
Because that just makes it like fun.
Yes.
Rather than like, oh God, I need to like figure this out, or like, no more Proxy and then I'm in debt. Like that's not helpful for me.
Yeah.
And so, I feel like the work that we do in narrative podcasting, it's all creative problem solving.
Yes.
Like that's just like every story is a new puzzle that you have to try to crack. And like, I'm good at that. Yeah. And it's fun for me. So, okay, so I have to try to get this many Patreon members. Okay, well, so like, what if we try this? Like, what if we try that? Like, it's just a lot of, to me, that is, I've had to reframe it as fun.
Yeah.
As like part of the art itself.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yes.
Otherwise, it's bad.
Yeah, and the marketing, the business, all of that. I think it's interesting. When I hit a brick wall early in my creative journey as an illustrator, and I talk about my rock bottom being not drugs and alcohol, but marketing books and business magazines, and really begrudgingly going into that zone. And there were so many different takeaways, but eventually I started to feel like, when you're in the business world, I feel like they really want to downplay the variables and the level of creativity that is required for a business to be successful, because they want to make it math, right? Yeah. They want it to be, this is the taxes, this is the accounting. Once you got that, it's pretty much good. And you're like, that's almost nothing about what makes a business successful. Yeah. And there's this huge areas of creativity that are required. And once I saw that, I started to see it as a creative problem. I'm going to just really quick summarize that with a few points, because I think, and then I want to ask you a follow-up question. Just because I think you said so many really great things.
Can I just say, I love this summarizing move you're doing as a host. I'm learning from you right now. I'm like, oh, this is great what you're doing. You're like making sense of my jumble of thoughts.
It's so good. I don't want people to miss it. And I also like to think about the utility of the show too. Yeah. Like, I'm constantly, cause a lot of the show is, and I'm talking about this just like comparing notes, because so much of the show is a monologue solo show where I can control everything. I try to inject some of that energy, not without like taking over completely, just some of the like bullet point energy.
Bullet point energy. You know okay. I mean? I like what you're putting down. I'm going to remember this.
So I won't bore you, but I think the question was about like, what does embracing the sales marketing side of your creative practice do for you? Positively, because we've said so much about what it can do negatively. And I think you said it gives you a bunch of at-bats when you start like this change helped you to like just try things quickly, fail quickly. I think you see that in really successful creative people like stand-up. People are constantly going out and trying things rather than just being perfect about it. I think there's a cutting the ego thing that happens where you have to get no bullshit of like, this either has to work or it doesn't.
Yes.
And I like the romantic side of creativity. I'm all about it, but sometimes I can overly romanticize and miss like, this is a human connection. And then it helps you with speed and perfectionism. And the fourth thing was you get to see it as a creative problem in its own right, the business. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also, this is maybe going to make me sound really not appealing, but like this whole process has also made me realize that I'm deeply competitive.
Right.
Like I played
pretty
tennis
too. Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Well, yeah. So like competition, being competitive is not seen as like generally a good trait
right.
In this culture because it's like, you know, capitalism, blah, blah, blah. And like, you know, I hate lots of things about capitalism. This is not what this podcast is about. But in terms of just like my own motivation, like I grew up playing tennis very competitively. I competed in everything. I competed in piano. I competed in tennis. I was a theater kid. We competed in Texas, weirdly, in theater. They had one-act play competitions, competed in debate. So I think just like I was trained to kind of compete and have that be fun. And so there's like, it taps into this kind of like, I'm a jock just trying to like hit a winner, you know, like really like hit the, you know, do an overhead shot that's going to win the match. You know, it like makes it kind of game like, which is like, you know, I guess these are all just like emotional mind tricks we're playing with ourselves to make us not be motivated to do the things that we need to do to try to survive. That's how I see it. Like, I'm trying to like, you know, make myself feel too weird that I like competition, but yeah, it's an emotional mind trick. And, I get to like inhabit a different persona, which is not normal for me. Like I'm a really nice person. Like, I like making people feel good. I like saying yes.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think it's a bad thing, you know? I mean, it gets me in trouble sometimes, but I'm like nice.
Yeah.
And so this is like,
you.
So this is fun for me to be like, oh, I'm going to be a sleazeball. Like, I'm going to be like Wolf of Wall Street right now. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, it's like a character and energy that you can inhabit. And so like, maybe that's one takeaway. I'm going to inhabit bullet point energy right now, which is like looking for the personas and characters that motivate you.
I think that's very real. I think about that a lot, finding those like archetypal characters that they're like, I need this energy right now. And I love that too, because, you know, you talking about the competitive side, this is something that I think about creative stuff a lot, like whole brain activity, needing to oscillate between several different types of you. And I think when I do get we're so in this culture of like inhumane levels of competition.
Yes.
So I get why it gets the criticism that it gets. However, I think that in order to be like a successful human, you have to be like a cell in the body with your own nucleus. Where like, I'm going to survive and thrive, and I got to do what I got to do that, and realize that you're part of the body. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that, there's something to doing both of those things.
I mean, you can be into playing video games and board games and like playing pickup basketball and not be an asshole.
Right.
Like, you know, but like in the actual container of the game, it's fun to like compete and like outdo yourself and outdo other people. And, you know, like, I don't know. I think, I think held in tension it's really important to have an ego. It's important to be like, I'm an individual taking care of myself, trying to do the best I can do. And I'm part of a system that, you know, hopefully is cooperative and that kind of thing. And the system is imperfect. and flawed, and we need to collectively work to try to make things more equitable and accessible for everyone. Absolutely. I recently read this memoir by Kara Swisher. Do you know who Kara Swisher is?
I know that name, but I
she's like huge tech, like the most famous tech journalist there ever was. Okay. And she, you know, has a bunch of podcasts and blah, blah, blah. She covered the tech industry from like early on to like, she like was on, she's like on a texting basis with like all like Elon and all the people. She's covered them for years. Yeah. She is hugely successful. And when I read her memoir, she used this phrase that I was like, oh my God, I've never heard this, but she would say all the time, like, I'm going to kill you. And I was like, what is she saying? Like, is this normal? Like, is that normal? Have you heard people? Maybe normal. It is in like the tech and business world. I've never heard anyone, but it was just a reframe. Like, oh, I'm going to kill that person. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to bury you. I'm going to defeat you.
Like in a competitive way.
In a competitive, playful way. Okay, it was a playful, like she's not actually going to murder people, you know? I was like, wow.
We're going to find out one day from another journalist that she's got tons of skeletons literally in her basement. But
yeah. So I was like, wow, that kind of energy. Like, I mean, that's maybe taking it, like, I don't really want to
kill anyone,
kill people. But I was like, oh, okay, maybe that's the kind of like energy. I mean, she's very successful. I don't know. We're not endorsing murder here.
No. Absolutely not. I don't want that to be confused whatsoever. But I think being a grown-up, being good in your creative practice, I think requires you to hold a lot of tension, like being able to have two energies or at least switch between them. All right. So I've got one more question for you. I have 1,000 more, but it'll have to be another time. But my last question is about, so we always end the show with what I call, it's a CTA, but it's a more fun one. It's call to adventure instead of call to action. And it's about taking some of these ideas from the show and putting them to practice in your creative practice. And so I thought it would be great to learn. I thought you did this incredible thing where you really did take a marketing effort and you turned it into a creative project, part of the show. Do you know what I'm talking about? Can you speak
the
to
4-part series fundraising campaign?
This. I think this is kind of incredible.
Thank you.
Could you tell us a little bit about that? And then maybe we can talk about how people could try something like this.
Yeah. So basically, last summer, I did a 4-part series about what the heck is a proxy conversation and why do they work? And so that was like the narrative series. It was like a 4-part series where I was like on a quest to try to figure out how to explain my show, because I was running into this issue with sources and listeners where like I had trouble convincing experts to come on the show because they just like, I just was not able to explain it adequately to them. That is like the content, but it really also was a 4-part month-long quest to get to 1,000 Patreon members. And spoiler, we did not make our number. So like, you know, it's interesting that you call this a success. I mean, it was a success in that we doubled our number of Patreon members. So it was like the biggest jump that we'd seen. And it was also fun. And I learned things about how, now I know how to like explain my show better. So, you know, win-win-win with a little, you know, minus of not making our goal. But really like the genesis of it is like, it's one of the oldest storytelling tricks, I think, in the narrative podcast world. You know, startup. If anyone remembers that podcast, Alex Bloomberg is like starting a podcast company and trying to get venture capital, which later became, you know, he started Gimlet, which, you know, got bought by Spotify and then flamed out. Like, you know, he documented the process and made that part of the narrative. Like he was the hero, the protagonist trying to like get rich. Just kidding. And so like, that was the model. I was like, okay, so I'm the protagonist here trying to like make it to this goal so that we can like get more hours for my producer and like continue making the show. So that's like already like there's a narrative cliffhanger built in of like, will they or won't they?
Yeah.
And so so there's that, and there's also just kind of, I think there's something fun about pointing at the thing you're doing, like pointing at the selling.
Yeah.
Like otherwise, like it'd be very difficult for me to make these pitches, because for me it's like it's kind of ridiculous what we have to do. You know, to be like, please pay, like, please, like, convince people to think we're worth spending money on, you know, is kind of a ridiculous it's a ridiculous quest. And so for me to like be able to do that full-heartedly, I have to like, I don't know, I need to point at the thing and kind of like have fun with it.
Yeah.
That's how I make sense of it. So yeah, in the series, I talked to, I discovered that proxy conversations have a history in restorative justice where, you know, victims and offenders, if they can't talk to each other for that healing conversation, or they don't want to, maybe it's too triggering, maybe someone has died, maybe someone's not remorseful, whatever the reason, there's this tradition of like, you can talk to a proxy victim or offender for that like healing conversation, which is sort of like the most important piece of restorative justice. And there's been research on this, and they found that like, oh yeah, it actually works and can actually be more effective. And then I also learned, I talked to this psychodramatist. I learned that like, oh, actually, like there's this whole therapy where role playing is huge and it feels similar to what I'm doing. And then I got him to explain like what he thinks is happening on a neurobiological level. So I don't know. I think that like I got a lot of good feedback from that series.
Yeah.
I think the lesson that I learned from that is you have to make your pitch entertaining. Like it has to be fun and informative. Like people, listeners, you know, your audience, they have to be getting something out of this. Otherwise, when you make the pitch, it's just going to be a chore.
Yeah.
And that's really what I want to avoid is like, I don't want, you know, when I start to make the Patreon pitch, everyone to be like, oh, this again, another NPR fundraising drive.
I call it a success because I think, you know, you have I know it's not completely arbitrary. I know there's like numbers behind what the goal was, but still an arbitrary metric of whether this thing succeeded or not. The fact that you doubled your patrons, and for me, what was successful is you made great episodes. And so for me, it's like this really interesting thing where you were able to hold the tension of the left brain goals versus the right brain goals and do that at the same time. And so I think it's an interesting challenge for the creative call to adventure today to think about what would it look like to create a creative project that also meets a business goal, and see if, I think it's even a challenge. I know this is possible. You've done it. I've done things in this realm, but the challenge is to see how you can do two things at once. And what can be cool about that and interesting about that. And also you can be transparent about that, like you were, which I think is another layer. I wanted to add one more thing. The other thing I really love about your journey here is that you have taken an obstacle and used it as a constraint to be an opportunity creatively, where, like you've said, narrative podcasting, traditional narrative podcasting, which traditional podcasting is kind of a weird term in the first place, but narrative radio doesn't have the funding it used to have. And lots of people in that scenario see that purely as an obstacle, whereas you turned it into a creative prompt and said, how could we take some of what's great about this and do it in a way that works in how people are consuming this media as companion, more passive stuff? Were you aware of that?
Yes.
That's what you were doing? Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you for bringing this up. Yes, absolutely. The main issue with narrative radio, why it's dying, is because it costs too much to make. it takes too long, costs too much to make the number of episodes you need to make to sell the ads and get the audience you want. And so this like idea of like, what is a light lift way to make narrative audio? Like it will, if you say those words light lift to a narrative podcaster, they will roll their eyes because this is like what is talked about all the time.
Right. Okay.
But for me, I was always like, oh, this is like a fun creative challenge.
Yeah.
Like, cause I'm sick of making the honkers of stories. Like I was like, oh, and honestly, I don't know if listeners are getting always more out of the experience. Mainly the reporting, like let's not, the reporting takes time and that's, something that I've had to dial back on my show. But anyway, so what I did was I decided, okay, how can I like lean into the like chat that people like and that honestly I like as a listener. I don't listen to any narrative podcast now. I only listen to chat. Yeah. So like the warmth, the depth, the spontaneity, how can I like do that but with like a narrative lens, which is like narrative lens is like high stakes, there's structure, there's character development. And so that really is the reason why I came up with this format of like segment A is narrative in its traditional form of like, here's the story of this person's problem, sets up the stakes, you get character development. It's usually around 8 minutes to 12 minutes. And I found that these are so easy to make. It's just like, I'm just like, wow, I can write that in like a day or two. Wow, that is bananas to me. And then the rest of the show is this proxy conversation that I prep and produce, for sure. I spend time figuring out how to make it so that there's a flow, that there's like, an arc, but it feels like just a conversation that we have heavily produced and prepped. And the idea there is like, how can we feel the drama of a conversation? Like, how can we tap into the highs, the lows, the awkwardness, the reveals? Like, how can we feel narrative change and like release and tension and stakes, but like in a conversation? Because to me, that was something that like narrative podcasts didn't do enough of, because we always use like short pieces of tape or like at the most 2 minutes or 3 minutes, but every encounter, like right now we're having this encounter. Yeah. There is like, maybe it's not high drama, but there is a beginning, middle, and end here. Yeah. Yeah. There are like insights, there are discoveries, there's
bullet points.
Bullet point energy. Like, things can happen. Things happen in a conversation. And so my challenge was like, how do I make it as like entertaining as possible?
Yeah. And the thing that I hear there that I feel like is really useful for me is there's, again, these two ways of being in your journey where there are times when, when you're voting, when you're on a panel, when you're speaking to this, when you're in part of the decision-making process, you can think about how the system might need to change. You can think about how, it'd be better if we had bigger budgets for these types of shows, or there's a time and space to think about the circumstance. But then a lot of your creative energy, you have to channel in what is the circumstance that you find yourself in and making the most out of it and using it as a creative prompt. And I think what you're doing is super interesting in that way. You. So thanks for that. And thanks for sharing all that.
Thank you. I mean, who doesn't love a creative constraint?
Oh yeah. Hey.
Right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
They're so fun.
As soon as you can recognize it as that. That's a difficult thing, especially when you're laid off. That doesn't feel like a constraint.
No.
Constraint, but it is. It was. And it produced something really interesting, and I'm excited to see where it goes. Thank you so much for spending all this time.
Thank you.
I got so much out of it, and I'm sure the listeners will too. Tell people where to start with Proxy.
Okay. Well, I think you should start with the Layoff Trilogy, which were the first 3 episodes, which is about the mental health toll of layoffs.
Yeah.
And we also do our first Proxy conversation. And then from there, I would maybe skip ahead to the most recent episodes, maybe go to Bisexual Wife Guy next.
I've heard that's a top popular episode. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's basically about this guy, this listener who wrote in, whose wife came out as bi and then divorced him. And we pair him with a woman who also did that to her husband as his proxy to just sort of like get some of that perspective. And that person happens to be my former boss.
That's juicy. That's great. I haven't heard that episode yet. I need to go listen to that one. Thank you so much for spending so much time here, and hope we get to chat again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was so fun.
All right. I absolutely loved that conversation. I had so many more things that I could ask or places I could have took it. It was just super, super rich. I hope you loved it. If you did, you're going to love Yowei's show, Proxy. Go check it out wherever you listen to podcasts. It's super good. Really different and both emotional and I just feel like you get a lot from it. So thank you so much for being on the show, Yowei, and hope to have you back sometime. Just quickly, I'm not going to go deep into this because I think we pretty much explored it in the conversation, but the CTA we're calling Creative Campaign. And the idea, put simply, is what would it look like for you to do a project or a series of work where you're creating the artwork, music, podcasts, images, whatever your medium is, but the project is to meet your business goals, whether that is to get Patreon backers like Proxy was doing, or whether it's to sell what you do to clients. What would it look like if you tried to do both at the same time? If you tried to make selling yourself an art? I think that some really interesting things could come of that, especially if I think there are a lot of scenarios where you wouldn't have to be super explicit that that's what you are doing. But I think it could be interesting to explore that too. How can you tell people like, hey, this is a project that's trying to be a campaign for my creative business? I think that is an interesting thing, and we're going to explore that. I think it's such a good prompt. I'm going to do it. We're going to do it with a podcast. I think we're going to do a Patreon campaign, Substack campaign, something of that nature, because I think it was so successful and interesting as a creative prompt. So hope you loved it. Go check out Proxy. Massive thanks to Sophie Miller for being a producer and editor on the show. Thanks to Connor Jones of Pending Beautiful for being an audio editor, a video editor, an animator, and a sound designer for Creative Pep Talk. Thanks to Yoni Wolf and the band Y for our theme song and soundtrack. Thanks to all of you for listening. Until we speak again, stay pepped up.